How's it going, guys? This video I'm going to be focusing on the blade cutting surface and the length of the cutting surface and how sometimes it could be deceiving. I have 4 different folding knives here. Now the whole premise of this video applies for any kind of cutting tool, whether you're talking about a folder or a fixed blade or an axe, it doesn't matter. We're just talking about edge tools. Alright? Now each one of these knives are different from each other. Okay, each one has its own characteristics. They're made by different companies. I mean, the first one we got Columbia Knife and Tool, then Kershaw, Spyderco, and Opinel, which is a French company. They're all different sizes. You know, I have them kind of lined up from, biggest to smallest here. They all represent different types of blade styles, okay, shapes and sizes. The first one is a CRKT Hisatsu folder, and this has a traditional or more traditional Japanese Tanto blade. Alright, the second knife here is a Kershaw shallot. This is going to represent a slight recurve. Now it's going to be very hard to tell, but this is a recurve blade. The blade from the base here goes up a little before it comes back down. Now I'm using my finger as an extreme angle, but there is curvature in the blade, it's not straight. Alright, so this is going to represent recurve blades. Then the Spyderco Centofonte 4 is going to represent a Wharncliffe blade, which has a completely straight or flat cutting edge, and then the spine has a gradual slope to the tip. The only difference between this and a sheep's foot blade is a sheep's foot blade would have a more abrupt or more blunted tip. Okay, I think more people do prefer the Wharncliffe, unless you're talking about perhaps a EMT or rescue knife. Then of course you don't want a pointed tip because it's going to give you more of a chance to poke into something, person you're trying to help out and so forth. So this will represent our flat edges. And the last knife here is our French Opinel, which has a very cool bolster lock or collar lock. And by the way, this is a number 6. Now a lot of the Opinels you'll see in videos on YouTube and what most people have are number 8s. They're the larger version. I happen to like the 6 because it's a very cylindrical knife. It's not flat. I mean, look at the difference. You can see how this knife is so much bigger, but it feels a lot smaller in the pocket because of how slim it is. When you have this round thing, you can't help but feel it. But anyway, this is going to represent a very, very common blade style. This is a very slight, not very heavy or extreme, but it's a slight clip point blade. All right, now it may not look like the top is angled, but if I turn this, hopefully the light will bounce off just right, and you will see right there. See that little tiny line? That's where the grind starts for this tip. And you can physically feel it too. This is straight, straight, straight. Now it's ground down to a different angle. The angle changes, okay? And because it's upswept in the front, that technically makes this a clip point blade. Although it's not as extreme as, say, like a Buck 110 folder, which has the more ideal clip point blade style. But anyway, that's what this is representing. Now again, I have these kind of lined up from biggest to smallest, but I'm focusing in this video about the actual cutting edge. And I want to talk about Spyderco just for a second because I think they do an awesome job with the presentation on their website. If you look at for a specific knife, the specifications on there are so specific. I mean, they're the best specifications there are. I mean, they go into such, depth in the detail. They tell you the length of the handle. They tell you the length of the blade. But importantly, they tell you separately in a completely separate measurement, not just the length of the blade, but the length of the cutting edge. And that's what we're talking about in this video. But even beyond that, they tell you the exact size of the opening hole, the exact width of the blade, blade stock, the locking mechanism, the whole deal. They go on, the weight. So I just love that. And they also measure in millimeters, which gives you a more precise and more, I think, worldwide measurement, which is easier. A lot of American companies use our inches and stuff, which is fine because us Americans, we're used to that. We like that. But America is a small part of the world, So I just think it's awesome that how much detail they go into that. So kudos to Spyderco for that. But I want to talk specifically about the actual cutting edge because sometimes knives are deceiving. And you'll probably pick that up in this video. At least that's the point I'm trying to put across to you guys. Now let's talk about, we're going to break these up into 2 groups. Spyderco and Opinel, and then the CRKT and the Kershaw. 2 separate groups. So let's put these out of the picture for a second and just focus on these 2. All right. Now, these two knives are both smaller to medium size folders, right? Now, if I put these side by side, well, let me get it in frame. Which one is the bigger knife? You can probably clearly see this. The Spyderco on top is bigger. It's physically longer from the tip to the butt end. If I line both tips up perfectly, you get a better idea of that. If I can let it stay, because it's rounded, it wants to fall. But you can see, I mean, the handle extends past. It's visually, okay, this one's the bigger knife. Now let's look at the blades. Which one has the bigger blade? Well, now, all of a sudden, the blades look like they're kind of identical, don't they? They look like the same exact length. Now, again, we're talking about length, not width. It's deceiving because if you ask someone this question, you look at it quickly, or even if you look at it for a couple seconds, you might just want to say this has the bigger blade, just because of the fact that it has a wider blade. All right, so I guess, yeah, by mass, it's bigger. It's physically bigger, there's more metal, but it's the same length. And when we're talking about cutting edge, and the purpose of a knife is to cut stuff, our sharpened edge is all we're worried about. We're not worried about if this is a 1/2 inch wide or if it's 15 inches wide. It doesn't make a difference. We're cutting with the edge. We're not cutting with the side of the knife. All right, so right off the bat, this is the longer, bigger knife. Now the blade is also wider. So to most people, you might say that, yeah, this is the bigger folder, and it's gonna probably cut better because it has a bigger blade, right? No, that's wrong. And this is the point I'm trying to make here. I took some tether cord, which, by the way, I'm kind of re-falling in love with. I got the stuff at CountyCom, and basically it's really thin 550 cord. Now, it's not exactly the same, but it's the same in every sense you would want to use it. So by the way, let's start a trend here. I know everyone loves the paracord bracelets. Let's see if anyone can make a tether cord bracelet, because I think that would be wicked because it's more slimline, not as bulky. Some of the paracord bracelets are just too fat to wear. They're really cool, but it's too bulky. So anyway, completely unnecessary to mention that for this video. But anyway, this tether cord is just a measurement. That's all I'm using it for. And I use the bright orange here just to give you an easier visual. Now, a lot of times, speaking of paracord, for bracelets, what we'll do is we'll take string, at least is what you're supposed to do. If someone says, how big's your wrist for a paracord bracelet? You don't take a flat ruler and just put it on there and say, okay, well, it's about 4 inches wide, and then we're gonna measure the side and kind of hold it around. No, you don't wanna do that. And not everyone has one of the material rulers, or material like tape measures. So what you do is you take a piece of string, a long one, wrap it around your wrist, find where the end meets, where it wraps around, pinch it off, right? Now you can cut that piece off, and now you have the exact length of your wrist. But instead of a round form on your wrist, now you can put it flat up against the ruler so you can get the exact measurement, right? Pretty simple. You can do this with ring sizes if you wanted to. Anything that's cylindrical, it's easier to do this way than to try to wrap a ruler around and just get a rough estimate. This will give you a very precise estimate. So what I did was I cut a little piece off here. Now this piece is the exact length of both of these blades. Okay, does that make sense to you? Does it sound right? Well, I may be lying to you. What do you think? Do you think that this is the same length edge on both these blades? I mean, look, this is clearly bigger. It's clearly wider. How can this knife, or excuse me, how can this knife have the exact same cutting surface as this knife? Well, let's see. Let's wrap these around. All right, so I'm going to hold this at the very base of the blade here. I'm going to kind of pinch it there just for a second. And just kind of run this on the edge very carefully because it is sharp. And you can see this is the length of this particular blade. If I can hold it so you can see it. All right, so that's the length of the blade. By the way, I didn't fart. My arm just, so I'm resting my elbow on the table and it just kind of squeaked by. You know what, it's just because of the YouTube comments. I would never have to mention that, but someone probably heard that. Someone who's really listening carefully, and they go, oh my God, he farted. Now, if I fart, I'll own up to it. I'll let you know. So anyway, there's the length, right? You can see that. So here's the usable cutting edge on this whole knife. Now let's put this up against this Spyderco. Same deal. We're going to put this at the very base of it. Okay, right there. Pinch it, hold it. Now push this up against, what? How is that possible? How is it that the Opinel's blade edge is longer than this Spyderco? Is that real? Look at the bottom here. You see where this is? Let me straighten this out. See it's on the bottom, right where it starts to be sharpened? Doesn't make any sense. Well, no, it does make sense, and I'm going to explain why. It's very, very simple. This blade is curved. Okay, it's upswept towards the tip as opposed to the straight edge. Now, they're the same length. However, any kind of curvature you have in a blade will have more, of the same length, will have actually a longer cutting surface. So it seems pretty strange, doesn't it? That the small knife actually has more cutting surface than the larger knife? Well, it's just a design. Larger handle, wider blade, but a straight blade. Okay, even though this has a smaller handle and has a narrower blade, the edge is longer, okay, because of the curves. Curved blades will have more cutting surface than straight blades. That's just a fact. It will always be like that. I think the easiest way for you guys to remember, I'm going to give you kind of an example here, and I hope this helps you remember. But think about traveling in a car, okay? Here's my two fingers. My thumb is going to represent home. This is where you live. This is home. And then up here, my pointer finger is going to be, let's say, your friend's house. So you want to travel to your friend's house, right? What's the easiest way to travel? Well, if I use a string as your line of travel, it would be a straight shot. Everyone learns that in school, right? A straight line is the easiest way to get from point A to point B. But let's say you have to make pit stops at other people's house, right? You go over here, then you go over here, then over here, then you get to your friend's house. Well, now that you're moving around, you're not going straight, you're taking a longer path to travel. And relating to knives, you have more length. It's taking longer, so it's going to physically be longer. Hopefully that's something you can kind of remember this by. So anyway, yeah, these two knives, just by appearance, if I said to you which one of these two knives has more cutting surface, you may not really think about it right away, and you say, oh, this one, because it's bigger. It's bigger, it's wider, it's more impressive looking, maybe because it's tactical. Subliminally in your mind, you're thinking, oh, it must be better at cutting stuff. Well, no, this literally has more edge. It has more sharp metal to work with than this one, albeit a very little piece, but still, it physically has more. So let's put these off to the side for a second and do the same thing with these larger knives. Okay, now again, this is a very slight recurve on this Kershaw. And on the CRKT, we have that Japanese style tanto. Okay, so we basically have the straight shot here, and then we have a slight curvature from our secondary point to our first point. Now, upon looking at it first impressions, if I asked you, let me try to keep these together as much as possible. I'm actually going to put the spines like this so I can line the very tips up to give you the best visual reference. Now, if I say, which one of these knives has more surface area to cut? All right, because the CRKT is physically longer because it has this massive handle. Right now, it's bigger. It's a bigger knife. The blade width is about the same. It's not too different visually. But because this is bigger, it's physically longer, the whole knife. You assume subliminally, or I shouldn't say that, subconsciously, you assume that this is going to have a larger blade or more blade, okay? Now, when I line them up like this, you can see that it doesn't. But if I just put it like this, where I have a little bit sticking out on both sides, and I say which one has the bigger blade, you're going to say, oh, the CRKT. That definitely, that has a bigger blade. It's going to be better at cutting stuff because you have more room to cut. Well, let's test it out. First, we'll measure this one. Now I have a different string, which I already pre-cut. All right. So we'll start at the very base here where it's sharpened. Now keep that in mind where it's sharpened because that's important to know. So there's a string at the very base. Can you see that? I'm going to pinch it there so it doesn't move. I'm going to run this across the edge so you get an accurate measurement here. And there's the tip. Okay. So now, same string, let's put it up against the Kershaw. Here's the very base. Line that up perfectly. Now run this across the edge. Hey, what do you know? It's the same size. It's exactly the same size. Let's do this again, make sure everything's accurate, nothing's funky here. Let's put this towards the base. It's kind of hard to hold this up against there, but can you guys see that? It's right up against where it's starting to be sharpened. Again, key word there. Run this across the edge. And there. There it is. And it looks like there's literally like a hair difference there. I mean, it's hard to tell because I'm trying to hold it tight, but obviously as I push down in the recurve, on top here, it's wanting to pull the thing straight. I can't, I'd have to like glue it to the edge, which obviously I'm not going to do, but anyway, it's right there. We're talking microns different. Okay, so even though this knife is physically longer, they have the same cutting surface on their blades. Now, remember I told you to remember the word sharp? Well, on this CRKT, we'll see here's our blade, right, between my fingers. However, they didn't sharpen it, even though the grind comes all the way down to here. They have about 1/8 of an inch or here or so that it's not sharpened. You know, it starts right there, so you lose a little bit of blade length there. So again, having the oversized handle and having, you know, a little bit of wasted space over here, you know, it's a fairly large knife in your hand. And you know, this one's pretty big too. This has the exact same cutting capability. Now in this one, they sharpened it almost to the very base. Okay, a much smaller area of non-sharpened steel. And this also has the you know, slight recurve in it. So these blade edge lengths are exactly the same. Now, if I hold these knives next to each other and try to line the blades up, it looks like the CRKT blade is longer, and that's because it is. But again, remember how we're not sharpened there? So let's bring that down a little bit to where the actual sharpened edges are. And now when you look at it, you'll see that they are on par again. Almost exactly the same. So, anyway, I just want to give you a quick little visual. Now, let's look at this. Let's take the largest knife here, the CRKT Hisatsu folder, and compare it to the Opinel, okay? Look at the difference in blades here. This is clearly a much larger knife in general, also has a much larger blade. But in reality, the only difference in cutting performance, I shouldn't say performance, that's the wrong way to describe it. The only difference in cutting length here between this knife and this knife, let's put the strings together, is that much. So if you say, I want the bigger knife because I'm gonna have much more capability cutting things, and this one is just not gonna cut the mustard, no pun intended, well, here's what you're arguing. You're arguing over that much more cutting surface. So, the overall point of this video is sometimes knife size is deceiving. Size of the entire knife as a whole isn't as important as how much actual cutting edge you have, how much cutting surface. Because again, these are edge tools. The reason we want these as tools is to cut stuff. That's what they do, they're knives, they cut stuff. But to look at these, the average person would pick both these up and you'd say, well, hey, which one do you think's better at cutting stuff? Oh, this is much better. Look how big it is. You know, it's such a bigger, better knife. You got such a bigger blade. It's deceiving because it's wider and the whole knife overall is longer. But when you really get down to it, you know, the real facts here, you're talking about it being, let's line these up again, that much more effective. Now, this could help in some cutting situations. You may be cutting with this knife and you cut down something, and let's say, I don't know, I don't have anything to give an example, but let's say you're cutting something that's this long, all right, and you're cutting into it, and then you do miss out your blade, you know, you come out of the cardboard or whatever you're doing, and now you gotta go back and cut that little piece again. Yeah, sure. Whereas if you had the larger knife, perhaps you can do it in one cutting stroke, all right? But we are talking about minute differences here. I just want to give you a visual reference and just tell you guys that, you know, if you're looking to get that new knife and you don't know whether to go with the large version or the small version, consider this. Really consider the difference. Look at your blade styles, look at the blade shapes. You know, curvature makes a difference. If you're one of those people that love these Wharncliffe blades, you know, that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, I like them for certain cutting situations. They do have their pros and their cons. All knife styles will. But just keep this a little bit of information in mind. You know, it's just something to think about. So anyway, that's all. Just want to talk about that a little bit here. Like I said, I was playing with the tether cord. I love this stuff. It's awesome. And you know what that reminded me of just now doing that? You guys ever see the movie Mouse Hunt? Oh man, I love that movie. I don't know why. It was like just a goofy kids movie. But I absolutely loved it. And it's reminding me at the very end when the guy's holding it and when the cheese goes through the, you know, all the machinery at the yarn factory or the string factory, and they get the idea of making string cheese. I just thought that was funny. I don't. That literally just popped in my head. It was random. Didn't even need to share that with you, but I figured I would anyway. So that's it, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video and maybe learned something. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you already knew this. But either way, I hope you were entertained. Entertainment is, I think, the first purpose of a YouTube video. If you happen to be educated as well, even better. But it's really just to take up our time and entertain us, give us something to do. So I hope you were entertained. Anyway, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.